Welcome to tonight's Force Society in the Know Parent Information and Networking session. My name is Julie Collette, and I'm the Parent in Residence at the Kelty Mental Health Resource Centre. Tonight's topic is suicide prevention and awareness, and this topic I will introduce tonight's speaker in a moment. As this is a very sensitive topic, if you know of someone or you are suicidal yourself, please call 1-800-SUICIDE or go to your local nearest emergency. As of November 2012, we will be pre-recorded, and you can go to the Force website for all archived sessions at www.forcesociety.com. This is just a brief reminder to fill in the feedback form. You can go to online and click the chain link icon at the lower right of your screen to access links and resources. You will also have a chance to win a $50 Chapters gift card, and all your information will be kept confidential. Tonight, I would like to introduce James Musgrave. James has a master's degree in counselling psychology from UBC and is currently the team lead for Aboriginal child and youth mental health in the Lower Mainland. He has a strong passion for addressing the issues of suicide through community awareness. He has 14 years of experience working with children, youth, and adults who have been suicidal and working with suicide survivors of all ages. Welcome, James.
Thank you. First, let me say I'm very happy to be here and greatly appreciate the opportunity that the Force has given me to be able to speak with you all today. As was said, I've been working with suicidal youth and adults for my entire career in one capacity or another. And it's a topic that is very near and dear to my heart. I presented to probably thousands of youth on the topic of suicide prevention and awareness in schools over the years, and trained many school-based professionals on how to best assess for suicide risk. I often begin these presentations by saying if I just walked in and said the word suicide 5 times and left, I would feel that I have done some good. Why? Because if I say it 5 times, you will have heard it 5 more times than you had before, and as a result, you might just be a little bit more comfortable when that word comes up in a conversation with someone that you care about that might be feeling that way. For the record, if I stick to my script, I will have said suicide about 40 times by the time that we're done. In putting this presentation together, I really tried to think about myself being a parent and listening to this tonight. There's lots of research in the field of suicide and suicidology. There's lots of percentages and numbers that we could access, but I really tried to eliminate those from the presentation, thinking that, again, as a parent, what I really need to know is if I have to go home and have a conversation with my kid, what do I need to be thinking about, and how does that conversation go? So with that in mind, one of the things I like to do is try and address some of the common myths about suicide. So I have a number of myths that you can see on the slide. Facts or fictions. The first one, talking about suicide may give someone the idea. Fact or fiction? Well, it's fiction. That's really why I'm talking about it with you today. Talking about it actually lets people know that you're willing to have the conversation, that you're not afraid, and that you're someone that can be there to have that difficult conversation. There's lots of taboo still in society around the topic of suicide, and it's very difficult to bring up whether you're the person that's concerned about someone or you're the person that's feeling suicidal yourself. But being willing to talk about it and have the conversation certainly doesn't make someone suicidal, but it lets them know that you're someone that they can trust and talk to. The second one, people who talk about suicide don't actually do it. Suicide happens without warning. That's also a fiction. The vast majority of people who complete suicide talk about it or send out some kind of sign or message before they do so. This can be very, as we'll talk about later, very obvious. I'm going to kill myself. I don't want to be here anymore. Or might be more subtle, and we'll talk about more of those later. The next one is suicide rates are higher for people of low income. That's also a fiction. Suicide is an equal opportunity issue that cuts across rich or poor, male, female, urban, suburban, and rural, cultures, and all ages. It may be more prevalent in some demographics than others, but no one is immune. If I think about my own career, the youngest person that I've ever worked with around the issue of suicide was 6, and the oldest was 78. The next one is more males commit suicide than females. That is a fact. Although the difference between males and females completing suicide is shrinking, males do tend to complete suicide more often than females. This is primarily in part due to the what we call the immediacy of the method chosen. Males tend to, and not always, but tend to choose more immediate means such as gunshot, hanging, or jumping, whereas females tend to choose methods that are less immediate, such as overdosing or possibly slashing their wrists. So what we mean by immediacy there is that the window of opportunity to change your mind or be found is bigger in the means that females tend to choose. So you can imagine in an overdose situation, the space between actually taking the pills and the pills beginning to have an effect on you can be, depending on what's been taken and the amount, can be hours. And those hours that pass are minutes that can be used to change your mind and ask for help, or be found by someone that will take you and get you to help. And so that's one of the primary reasons why the completion rate is lower for females. Another fact or fiction: once a person is suicidal, they're suicidal forever. This is another fiction. Suicide isn't a condition. It's not a medical diagnosis. It's not in the DSM. It's really what it is. It's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. That for the individual in question, they don't feel that problem can be solved in any other way. When that problem has been solved, we can support them to get to resolve that problem in a healthier way. The level of suicidality in many cases goes back to zero or minimal, and may not be an issue for them anywhere in the future. If I think about that 6-year-old that I talked about earlier that I had worked with, in terms of that notion of a temporary problem that needs to be solved, when the school called me, he had a very clear plan. He knew exactly what he wanted to do, how he was going to do it, when he was going to do it, and why, which would put him at very high risk in terms of assessment. I worked with him for a while, and part of what was going on for him is that his home life, his parents, there was a lot of screaming and yelling, very verbally abusive relationship between the parents at home, not towards him, thankfully. But living in that environment, what he really came to express to me was that what he wanted more than anything else was for things to be quiet. And when we're talking about suicide, being able to have the conversation is important. I got to the point in working with him where I was able to say to him, and this always sounds silly when I say it out of context, but I said, you realize that if you kill yourself, you'll be dead, and you won't actually be able to hear how quiet it is, which would be the solution to your problem. And he looked at me, and kind of his whole body and expression changed, and he realized, oh, well, I don't want to do that then. In his mind, at 6, of course, he really thought that would be one way to make things quiet, but really didn't associate, even though he talked actively about killing himself, that by doing that, he would be dead and not being able to hear. So that's a good example of how that it's a temporary problem, but obviously a permanent solution. The next fact or fiction that we've got up there is that most suicides are caused by a single dramatic event. This is also another fiction. There often is a last straw event, or the straw that broke the camel's back, as they say. But I would say in almost every case, it's that event or that situation on top of many, many other stressors that we'll talk about later that have led the person to get to a place where they are going to attempt a suicide. Next one, improvement following a serious personal crisis or depression means that the risk of suicide is over. That is actually also a fiction. This is often the time of greatest concern if I think about some of the clients that I've worked with, in that they've got a little bit of energy back, and that maybe they lacked while they were feeling depressed or in that state where they felt helpless to make anything different in their lives. And having that bit of energy can put them at risk to actually being able to follow through on some of the thoughts that they might have. It's also sometimes can be a sign that they've found a way to be comfortable with the decision that they've made to attempt to take their life. The last one we've kind of covered, but that it's unhelpful to talk about suicide when a person is depressed. In my opinion, it's helpful to talk to anybody about suicide regardless of how they're feeling. Whether that's about information sharing like we're doing tonight, or out of genuine concern for your child or a friend or anyone else that you care about. Again, being able to have the conversation lets them know that you're someone that can be trusted with the issues that they face. So how does someone become suicidal or get to a place where attempting suicide actually makes sense? First of all, attempting suicide is a very difficult thing to do. If you think about it, every single body or every single cell in our body is designed to survive. We have that survival instinct in all of us. And so overcoming that is not a simple thing or a decision that can be lightly made. We're really wired to survive, so the notion of trying to take our lives is very contrary. That being said, there are a number of stressors that can contribute to somebody feeling that way. Some of them may be situational, and others might be what we call chronic. It's important to note that none of these stressors alone or in numbers automatically make someone suicidal. It has more to do with how each of us manages the stress that these situations can bring on. And I'm going to mention that a few times as we go along because it's really important. I don't want anybody walking out of here thinking my child has that stressor, therefore they are suicidal. We're going to come through this and have a conversation about a number of items that can cause stress in our lives. But the majority of us are able to manage those stressors in a relatively healthy way. But for some of us, because they're piled on top of other ones, or for other reasons, our ability to cope is less. So situational stressors, things that come up in life from time to time over the course of our lives, where we aren't able to cope with them and they can really weigh us down. They tend to be relatively short-term crises that given time we can adapt to and overcome. Knowing what your child is dealing with in their lives on a day-to-day basis is an important thing for all of us parents to be aware of. So some situational stressors, and I've divided these into two groups. The first group we'll look at, school and society. So in trouble with school authorities or police, we can imagine the stress involved with being expelled or excused from school or arrested or detained by the police. There's a lot of stress involved in that, the activity that led to that situation happening, what's going to happen next, am I going to have a record, what are my parents going to say, what will people think about me, all definitely a high stress situation. Loss or disappointment in school or sports. I didn't add that in the slide that you're looking at, but the poor grade, not making the team, letting the team down, not being able to complete or be successful in those arenas add stress to our lives. They're disappointment for ourselves and for people around us. Change of school and or address. When we're talking about stress, that is a major life stress for people of any age when you're changing, when you're moving. You change schools, move to a new town, everything involved with letting go of your old school, your old friends, your old neighborhood, and having to fit in again in a new school, and all that brings is definitely something that causes stress in all of us. If we look at interpersonal and physical issues that are situational stressors, the loss of an important person through death or divorce. Obviously, anytime we lose someone close to us, that's a loss, and it's a stress on our family and how we cope with that loss, and individually as well. I also wanted to note, I didn't put that in there, but loss of important person, we should always remember to include pets in there as well. Worked with a number of people over the years where the loss of a long-term family pet, a dog or a cat, has really been a triggering and traumatic event for them, and as equal a loss as a loss of any other member of their family would be. The recent suicide of a friend or relative, in terms of assessment, this automatically puts someone at significant risk. Knowing that someone that has completed suicide makes the act seem somewhat more acceptable, a somewhat more viable solution to whatever may be troubling you. So it's certainly a point of concern, and we should be open to making sure that people that have lost someone to suicide are able to get the support that they need to help work through that loss. Breaking up with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, I know that this might not be so crushing for us as parents looking back at our experiences when we were teenagers and going through those relationships in our life. But we also know that tweens and teens in particular, those social relationships are critical in their day-to-day life. And so whether they've done the breaking up or were broken up with, the loss of that significant relationship in their life is important, and we should be sensitive to that. The next one, exposure to violence or bullying, whether this is in the home or socially at school, more and more we need to be aware of how this happens online. Certainly recent events serve as a tragic reminder of the impact that bullying and violence can have on the safety and well-being of our children. And it's an important conversation for the community to have as a whole, for families to have as a whole, and for individuals to be able to get the support that they need when they're the one that's exposed to that violence or bullying. A couple other ones that might come up for teens in particular, a feared pregnancy, having to share that news, all the stress that goes along with thinking about the age that you are and what that might mean is certainly a stressor. And any major disappointment or humiliation, again, that can happen on the academic front, through athletics or socially. These things, because our teenagers are so socially wired, they're always magnified, whereas we as adults may now be able to look at those things and kind of go, well, you know, I've been there, I've done that, it's not that bad. The way our teens are wired, especially those social humiliations or disappointments, are very big situational stressors. So again, I want to mention, I've already done this once, that these are situational stressors. They're relatively short-term stressors that improve over time, but may seem very overwhelming for our children in the moment. If we move on to a conversation about chronic stressors, chronic stressors are things that exist over a long period of time and are unlikely to change. Children may seem to build a tolerance or resiliency to deal with these things, but they add a level of stress that makes the situational stressors that we've just discussed that much more dangerous. If you think about layering these things, the chronic stressors that we're just about to look at kind of form the base of a stress. And then on top of that, if you start to add situational stressors that go on, you're building this very negative and dangerous building of stress. And each of us has a different moment where it becomes too much. But the more that we can eliminate the chronic stressors that form the base of that building and address in a healthy way the situational stressors that we just discussed, the better off that our children can be. So some of the chronic stressors that youth today may face, if we look at home life, the chronic depression or mental illness of a parent, the person's own mental health issues as well. What these things and the rest of the list there that we'll get to in a moment really speak to at home is that sense of unstableness. Children like predictability. They like knowing that they're loved and connected. They like boundaries. So it'll be hard pressed to get a teenager that will admit to the boundary one. But all of that adds to their sense of connectedness, attachment, and that sense that they're loved and that they're supported in what they do. And so the things on this list really play havoc with that sense of connectedness and well-being. Having a parent with a mental illness, especially if it's untreated, there's an unpredictability. You're not necessarily sure what's going to happen when you get home, whether or not there's going to be a meal on the table, what kind of mood your parent is going to be in, what kind of capacity that they're going to have on a day-to-day basis. And that's an incredible stress to place on a child of any age. Again, their own mental health issues. In our line of work, we deal with kids with all different types of diagnoses. And part of that stress for them comes from especially the social piece and knowing that they're different. Knowing that if I have fetal alcohol syndrome or autism or depression or anxiety, that in social situations people are going to recognize that I'm different or I'm not going to know the right thing to say or do. You can imagine walking around being afraid of everything that you're going to say or do and whether or not it'll be the right thing or people will notice if it's wrong. It's a tremendous stress for kids to carry around. Obviously, any type of ongoing abuse, emotional, physical, sexual, mental, to be in an environment where that is a chronic situation is incredibly traumatic and stressful for anybody, not just kids. Severe parental conflict, again, that story of the 6-year-old boy that I had worked with, not knowing what's going to happen with your family, not having home be a stable environment is very difficult for kids to deal with. Family involvement with drug or alcohol abuse, again, falls under that sort of same notion that stability at home is constantly in question. You never really know what to expect or how you're going to be treated when you are at home, what your friends think about your parents, what the community knows or says about your family or family member that's involved with drugs or alcohol. Poor communication with parents. Now, most people think about the screaming and yelling version of this, but it's also the quiet, withdrawn one, where the kids sort of spend a lot of time in their room and they don't come out and the parents don't go and are worried or concerned about trying to invade their privacy to have a conversation. So that one's just as much a stressor as the other side, where there might be a lot of conflict between you and your child. Pressures to achieve or gain parental approval or acceptance. This one is relatively rare, but we certainly see it on the academic front, that push to get straight A's, that push to be successful, to make it to college or university, to provide for the family or to carry on the family name and be successful. We see it in athletics, again, as a coach of my own boys in hockey and soccer and ball hockey. Sometimes you come across those parents that sort of have this notion that they're, what I jokingly say, that their kids are going pro tomorrow. That they need to score the most goals, they need to be the leader of the team, they have to be the captain, they need to make the rep team, and anything less than that is unacceptable. When we're talking about the sports side of things, the intention of sports is to have fun, and that type of pressure on a kid really takes away from the fun and all the developmentally good things that being part of a team can bring. If we move away from home life and look at interpersonal relationships, if we look at the involvement in physical violence, that's the same as at home. With friends, boyfriend or girlfriend, any type of relationship that has any type of violence or abuse in it is an obvious stressor and is difficult, especially when we think about where our kids are at in terms of developmentally understanding relationships with others, what it means to be in a relationship, what they get out of that relationship. Those relationships are often hard for youth to pull away from, even though people might look at that and say, well, you can't, what are you thinking being with that person when they treat you that way? But they're getting something out of it, which makes it difficult for them to pull away from. Inability to relate well to peers, that we spoke to that a little bit when we think about kids with mental illness. But it's also the socially awkward child or that sense of just not relating well to others, feeling like you're different, and that creates a separateness and aloneness that is certainly a stressor, because we're social beings and we're really designed to be connected to others. So when we're not, that can be a stressor for sure. Sexual promiscuity is one. It's typically one that we see in girls as a coping mechanism, where they're usually looking to replace something that they're not getting. There's that sense of connectedness or attachment or meaning or self-esteem that they use their sexuality to meet that need. That's a stressor, because typically when we seek relationships like that out, the result is when that relationship ends, there's that feeling of emptiness, of being used, of being mistreated, which only makes that feeling worse. Feelings of worthlessness or being a burden or having let other people down, none of that feels good, again, regardless of where that happens, socially, academically, athletically, or otherwise. Nobody likes to feel that way, and if there's that pressure on them where they feel like they've let people down, or they're not worth someone's attention, or they're not worth a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or being loved by their parents or others, that's an unhealthy and stressful place to be. And I think that all of that is really wrapped up in that last line of feelings of guilt or failure, when we feel that we're no good, that we'll never amount to anything. That's a heavy burden for anybody of any age to have to carry with them. So with the stressors that we've just discussed in mind, now let's talk about the behaviors or what usually is referred to the warning signs of suicide. These behaviors are things that we often see in people that are suicidal, but as I said with the stressors, no one of these behaviors means that your child is suicidal. I want to be very careful about that. Nor does a collection of them mean that they're suicidal. What they do tell us, though, is that we need to be concerned about how our kids are feeling and what might be going on for them in their lives, and begin to have that conversation about what we might be able to do to better understand what's going on for them and support them. So if we look at some of the warning signs of suicide, the first one is probably an obvious one, and possibly the scariest one for us parents to hear, when our kids actually talk about wanting to kill themselves. We'll get to what to do about that in a minute, but let me just say for now that we'll definitely want to ask some questions about that. Talking about leaving, this can be more obvious, it can come in a couple of different forms. It can be more obvious, I wish I was dead, to some more subtle comments about, I wish I wasn't here anymore, I can't wait to be leaving, I'd rather be anywhere else than here. Those are things that kids will often say when they're uncomfortable with the situation that they're in, but can also be seen as possible signs that they're thinking about what it would be like to physically not be here anymore. Previous suicide attempts or self-harming behavior, I'm going to separate that into two. If we look at previous suicide attempts, in terms of assessing risk, if your child has attempted suicide before, then they're automatically at risk to attempt again. I want to be careful with that, though. It doesn't mean that it's inevitable that they've tried once, that they will try again and again and again. As we said earlier, suicide isn't a condition that never goes away. But what it does mean is that they've gotten to that place once before where they really did believe that that was the answer to their problems. And so we want to make sure that they develop the coping skills and have the supports in their life that they need to make sure that they don't get to that place again. This list, I want to talk about self-harming. Self-harming is different. That could be a whole other topic of conversation. And actually looking at In the Know, I know that you've had someone come and speak to that previously, which is great. There's certainly a connection, but it's not the direct connection that many people think. Self-harming, in my experience, the people that do that are looking to do one of two things. They're looking to release. When they talk about the feeling of self-harming, what it's doing for them, it's releasing the negative emotions, the pain, the suffering, the anguish that they've got inside them, and it's sort of a way to let it out as a coping mechanism. And the other way is it tends to be a way to shift focus away from that pain and suffering, that if they're focused on a self-inflicted pain and suffering, they don't need to think about all the stressors that we have already talked about that are overwhelming them in their life. That being said, it is a concern in relation to suicide because sometimes self-harming, depending on what they're doing, can lead to an accidental death. And it's just that general flirting with danger that we are worried about around self-harming. But if you go back to the website and watch, I believe it was Dr. Black speak about that. He does a nice job of looking at the issue of self-harming. This next list gets longer as social media and the ways to connect and express ourselves in the world gets bigger and bigger. When I first started doing this, it was talks, jokes, and writes. Then we added draws, and now we have to write or add texts and posts and tweets. What we're looking for here in terms of themes of death or suicide, we all go through developmentally through a phase in our life where we're a little preoccupied or curious or death plays a role in our lives. Usually that happens when we start to lose our grandparents, or maybe we do through one other means or another lose someone close to us at an age. And so there's a natural tendency to sort of explore that dark side and have a curiosity about it at different ages. But what we're talking about here is that it really starts to become a strong theme throughout these different ways of expressing themselves. They may be saying some of the things that we talked about already, threatening suicide, talking about leaving, or just generally talking about sort of death and loss. So that's something that we want to be concerned about. Probably the one that concerns me the most in the years that I've been doing that is the conversation about feeling worthless or hopeless or helpless. It's a really tough place to be when you feel worthless and unimportant. And it's really hard to help someone that's in that space recognize that they aren't. When people feel helpless or hopeless because they've tried to change the negative stressors in their life, they feel like they've done everything they can to make things better. It's really difficult to work with them as a professional or as a parent to help them see that there's another way, right? There's always another thing that we can try, another way that we can address the issue. And so that's probably, of all of these warning signs, that's the one that has always concerned me the most in my work. Changes in eating and sleeping patterns. Again, you're getting you're going to get a theme here in terms of this notion of things changing. So that may be your child starts eating a lot more than they ever have before, or a lot less, sometimes to the point of starving themselves to some extent. And sleeping patterns can mean that they're having a really hard time getting to sleep, staying asleep, or that their sleeping pattern slowly shifts, so they're staying up later and later in the night and sleeping more and more through the day. That's often also a coping mechanism, because if you're sleeping through the day, you don't have to deal with the stressors that we've talked about, whether that's at home or at school or elsewhere, because you're avoiding the situations altogether. Self-neglect, you see that specifically in hygiene and dress. Again, we're looking for changes. Your child doesn't spend time, brushing their teeth and doing their hair in the morning, but they used to. They used to be sort of put some thought into what they were going to wear the next day or that morning, and they don't. They start wearing clothes, the same clothes every day, or clothes that aren't clean and probably should be in the laundry. Brushing their teeth, just generally taking care of themselves. They begin to care less and less about themselves and how they look, because if they don't care about themselves, why would anybody else? The next part of the list, start giving away important possessions or throwing them away. I'm not going to need these anymore. I won't need these where I'm going. I don't really care about this stuff. Sometimes it's a gifting. I want you to have this. I won't need this where I'm going. We're not looking for, there's a cycle to toys and things that we have, the material things, but what we're looking for here is more specifically on things that mean something that is of value, whether that's a financial value or emotional value to your kids, and they start giving it away or not caring about it anymore. Related to that, is dropping out of different activities that they like. Maybe they play an instrument, but they decide, I don't want to play, I don't want to do that anymore. Or they drop out of acting class or stop playing and trying out for sports teams, things that they normally do, but suddenly they're trying to tell us that they're not interested in anymore, that they don't care about that. Are all different warning signs that we should be concerned about. Tidying up loose ends, making amends, forgiving enemies, sort of wrapping things up socially. Someone goes through the process of contemplating suicide. There is a small thoughtful piece in there, in that sometimes they recognize that if I'm not going to be here tomorrow, I don't want that person that I was fighting with think that it was their fault, or I don't want to leave with that hanging over my head. So there can be a bit of a drive to tidy things up, forgive people, and have things sort of nicely wrapped up for when they move on. Significant mood swings is certainly something that you'll see. Significant changes in behavior, whether that's becoming more withdrawn than you were before or more outgoing than you were before. Again, this idea of significant changes is really what we're looking at here, where they've behaved in one way and suddenly they're behaving in a very different way that you don't recognize and you're not sure where that's coming from. Another way that you'll see that is in risk-taking behavior. That can be in dangerous driving. It can be either in the starting to use drugs or alcohol, or in the increased use of drugs or alcohol if they already have been. A lot of times you'll hear when you look up things around suicide that it's the second leading cause of death for youth. Some people would argue that it's the first, that there's a lot of single vehicle accidents and other deaths that the coroner decides are accidental, that may actually be completed suicides. And it's all because they're taking that risk-taking behavior and taking the challenge, and they're less worried about if they happen to die in the process. The last one that we've got there seems like maybe a bit of an odd one compared to the list that we've discussed so far. But after a period of withdrawal, suddenly appearing like their old self. Right? There's a not necessarily clinical depression, but there's a depressive state of mind. We've talked about helpless and hopeless and worthless feelings. And when people are in that state, the energy required to plan, organize, and go through with a suicide attempt, it requires a lot. And they often just don't have the energy to do it. But sometimes they find that energy, and we see that uptick in their behavior, and okay, finally, like things are back to normal. And it's easy to step back and think, okay, everything's going to be fine, which my hope is that it would be. But sometimes that sense comes because they've resigned themselves to the fact they've sort of come to peace with what they're about to do, and the burden of will I or won't I, or what will people think. They get to a place where they kind of go, I'm going to do it. I won't be here. I've got nothing to worry about. And so we see that almost elated or return to them old selves. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that they're out of the woods, and we want to make sure that they've got some support during that time too. So they wouldn't put a lot of numbers in there. Here, I think, is the only one. That one study looked at people that had completed suicides and talking to the people that were around them. And all of this is easy to do in hindsight. I wanted to make sure that I said that today. All of these things you wouldn't think too much of, maybe, in and of themselves. But in hindsight, when we look back at people that have completed suicide and talk to their loved ones around them, they would report that roughly 70% of people that did complete suicide tell somebody about their plans or give some type of warning sign or exhibit some of these behaviors or others that, again, in hindsight, people look back and go, if I had only noticed that, or if I had only taken that more seriously. So that information is out there, and we're sharing this today so that you, as a parent, might be able to pick up on some of those signs in your own child. So now we get, to me, the part that matters most. What can we do as parents, as friends, as kids, if you're watching this with your kids? What can we do to be helpful? This is going to look deceptively simple, and really because it is, the answer to this question, though it can be a real struggle for parents and professionals alike to follow through on, is to listen. Listen and stay calm. All right? Youth will often talk about parents or adults in their lives that listen but don't really hear what they're saying, or don't really understand, or parents that try to provide solutions. So I went and I talked to my parent about what my problem was, and all they had was solutions. That makes sense as parents, that we're driven to try and solve our kids' problems for them. But while we're busy trying to provide solutions, we're not listening. The second that you start thinking about what the answer to the problem is, you stop listening to what the problem actually is. And so it's really just being there for them, not getting caught up in the details, just letting them tell their story from their perspective. This is without question the single most powerful tool that you as a parent or I as a professional have in dealing with youth that may be feeling suicidal. The next important piece is we have to be able to ask the question. We've touched on that a few times already, but we have to be able to comfortably and calmly ask, are you thinking about suicide? Or it sounds like you might be thinking about killing yourself, right? There's a moment that comes in that conversation where people will shy away from telling you how they feel because they're trying to gauge whether or not you're somebody that can go there with them. And so one way to let them know that you're willing to go there is to just ask the question. Now, if I'm honest with you, when you ask that question the first time, they'll probably say no. No, nobody I wouldn't do that. That's ridiculous. But there's still some value. We don't want to be asking that to them every time when they come home from school or anything like that. But there's great value when you start to see some of those warning signs or those changes in behavior and you're concerned, and just putting it out there. Are you thinking about suicide? I'm worried about you. Can we talk about that? You know that you can talk to me. I want you to be able to talk to me if you're feeling that way. And whether that's they reject that to begin with, you've planted a seed where they know, okay, so this is something that my parents maybe could talk to me about, and maybe they would be willing to listen. We need to take threats seriously. If our kids are talking to us about taking their lives, about not wanting to be here anymore, we need to listen to that, because that's telling us that there's something going on in their lives that's seriously wrong for them. Let them talk about how they're feeling. Again, this is all about the listening piece. We want to be caring and accepting, non-judgmental. We let them know that we're willing to help, that we're willing to listen and support in any way that we can. We want to stay with them. When you have that type of conversation, you don't want to say, okay, well, let's talk about that at the next commercial, or when I get home from grocery shopping, we'll pick that up. It's a conversation that once you start, you want to be able to have the time and give them the time to follow that through. And for yourselves and for your kids, if they've got friends, get help from a professional. You do not have to do this alone, right? It's a heavy burden to bear to know that someone in your life is suicidal, whether it's your child or someone else, and not share that burden with someone else. It's a very heavy thing to have to carry around. The next part that I want to talk about is things that we should avoid. These are things that over the years, not just parents but professionals as well, kids have told that some of their experience in dealing with adults or trying to have that conversation that stops the conversation from happening. Right. One that I added last night when I was going through this again is the details. I'm going to start there. The accuracy of your kids' stories, who said who to what, who did what, the day, the time that something happened, did they really mean that? Are you sure that's what they meant? Are all 100% irrelevant in that moment. It doesn't matter, right, what the accurate story is. It doesn't matter if that's what their friend really meant when they said that. What matters is that your child feels stressed and traumatized to some degree by that event, that there's something that happened in their lives that has moved them to a place where they're possibly in tears, possibly thinking about suicide as a way of dealing with it, or just generally struggling with what happened in their day. Again, that speaks to where we started, just listening, right? It's not about the details. Blaming, it's your fault, you got yourself into this mess, why do you always do that? That seems a pretty obvious one. We don't want to be blaming our kids for feeling the way that they're feeling. We want to listen. There may be a conversation that can happen later about how could you have handled that situation better, or what can you do the next time. But in that moment, when they're being open with you about that, blaming isn't going to get you anywhere. Ignoring. is obviously something that we don't want to do. If it's not taken seriously, the crisis could worsen. By avoiding the topic because you're uncomfortable with it, your child may perceive that you're not interested, that you don't really care. And we want to make sure that that they know that that's not the case. They're just doing it for attention, right? This is something that comes up a lot. This is a very, I don't want to say typical, but standard response from, again, parents, professionals alike. Oh yeah, they're always talking about suicide. The answer that I've got for everyone when this come up has been the same, and it has been for years. It's of all the good, bad, or horrible things that your child could do to get your attention, why is it that they feel that they've gotten to the point where talking about suicide, attempting suicide, is really the only way that they can get your attention, right? If they're doing it for attention, it's because they're not getting it. We don't want them feeling that they need to talk about suicide or threaten suicide to get our attention. But it is a strong message to us that we need to be giving them attention at different points in their lives. So yes, all of them are doing it for attention to some degree. We need to be able to find a healthy way to give it to them and help them understand that there are healthier ways that they can ask for that attention. Another one that comes up, this one always comes up a lot when I'm talking to presenting to youth in schools, keeping the secret. Right? Your friend or child may not be happy about you not keeping the secret, but it's better to have them be angry and safe. As I said before, this isn't something that you should have to deal with on your own as a parent. There are people in your community that you can talk to. We're hosted here tonight by the Force and the Kelty Center, which are both great resources for parents to find someone that they can talk to. What I'll say to the youth, I'm a bit more blunt when that comes up in my presentations with them. I'll be quite honest and say, you know what, it's better for everyone involved to have an angry friend rather than a dead friend. And that may sound harsh, but it's very true. It's better to even lose that friendship knowing that you help keep them safe than keep that secret and then have something happen. And that would be an awful burden to have to carry for any of us at any age. The next thing I talk about, because if we're not going to keep the secret, we should talk about where we go to get some help and what we can do, right? Having a suicidal friend or child is not something that you should keep to yourself. As I've said a few times, it's a heavy burden for anyone at any age to bear. It's something that needs to be shared so that the person that's been given that information has someone that they can talk to, as well as the person that's feeling suicidal can have someone to talk to. Who you talk to is really up to you. I really just want to stress that you're talking to somebody. That might be a trusted adult if you're a youth. It might be another parent, a relative, a neighbor, friend, doctor, religious leader, someone from the school. At school, kids and parents can talk to their kids' teachers, support workers, counselors, principals, vice principals. So there's two long lists of people that we all have in our lives that we can go and talk to about this. People that our kids can talk to, people that we can talk to. More than anything, it's just important that you're talking to somebody. On top of that, you've got a number of professionals. Each community is different, where it's their job, whether that's child and youth mental health, or some communities have suicide prevention counseling programs in place. There's always somewhere where you can go to talk. Obviously, 911, if we're concerned about imminent danger, if your child has attempted and they're disclosing to you that they have, let's say, ingested some pills, we want to call 911 and get them to the hospital and make sure that they're safe. There are crisis lines. There's the kids' help phone. I didn't put specific numbers because I know this is going out to a number of communities, and it's my understanding that in each of the community sites hosting this event, there'll be some conversations with local professionals about what the specific resources and supports that are there in place. Again, the important thing is that you talk to somebody. All right. So, two last thoughts that I'll share, and they're related before we wrap up and start looking at questions. I've had the fortune of working with many suicidal youth and adults in my career, and I want to stress that though this may not be everyone's experience, To this date, I feel very certain that I've never worked with anybody that actually wanted to die. Suicide actually isn't about death, right? It's about desperately wanting something to stop or change or end or be different, and feeling like you've tried everything you can possibly think of to make that happen and nothing's worked. Again, I think about that 6-year-old boy, right? Everything he could think of, the only thing that he could think of to make his life a little quieter was to think about taking his own life, right? So it's not about him taking his own life, it's about him wanting the quiet and not knowing how to get it. So remember that story, and for all of us, the first thing that we need to do is probably take a deep breath, be as calm as we can, and then just listen, right? I noticed on the posters for this presentation that talked about opening one more door, and that's an analogy that I talk about a lot in terms of working with suicidal youth and in supporting professionals that work with them as well. That the stress of having that child disclosed to you is great, but if we recognize that suicide is a door that we all have, that we can all walk through at any time, it's an option, it's a potential solution to all of our problems. But that it's one door, and that for us, the majority of our lives, we have hundreds, possibly thousands of doors that we can walk through at any one time to deal with a particular situation, right? People that are feeling suicidal have simply gotten to the place where they feel like there's only one door left available to them. There's only one way to solve their problems. And our job as parents and as professionals and as people that care, by listening, showing that we're willing to have the conversation, that right there is one more door. Right? Getting them some more support, having further conversations, that becomes another door. And so all we really need to do is make sure that they've got one more door. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, James. That is a very, very informative presentation that will hopefully leave or have people feeling when they leave that they know a lot more about it and they know where to go for help if they need more information. I think from what I'm taking away from this, the main thing is listening. As parents, sometimes we think we're listening and we may not be. We may want to help and fix, as you say, and solutionize, and we may actually not be listening and as well as we could be. So I would encourage parents to look at or Google active listening and learn a little bit more about some very simple strategies for what listening and active listening looks like. That might be a first step in taking that really key point of listening and listening well. That would be one thing. In terms of questions, the community, parents and residents have sent in a lot of different questions, and I'm not sure how much time we have. Do we have about... Okay, great. So, we've got a little bit of time. I think one of the questions that pops into my mind first and foremost would be, this is great information. I'm a parent. There's a lot of these factors in place that I'm doing, but my child won't go for help. He or she will not go to appointments. He or she doesn't even think they need help. What would you suggest?
That might be the toughest question. You want to make sure that doesn't become a struggle, that you're attempting to drag them to something, because that puts them in a position where they're actively resisting, and it doesn't become about asking or getting help. It becomes more about the struggle between you and your child. Mm-hmm. So it's important to let them know that you're concerned and that you'd really like them to seek help or seek help with them. That's another important thing, that it's not necessarily you need to go to talk to somebody, but how about what if we went to talk to somebody? So that they know. Again, sometimes you're not going to be able to make your kids access the help that you think that they need, but if they know that you're there and that you're listening and that you're caring for them as best you can, and it's about that, it's not about who's going to win that battle to go for help or not. That can help. Obviously, if you're at a place where you really feel the danger is imminent, then you are looking at calling 911 and having them taken, as opposed to hopefully helping them come and seeking help themselves.
Okay. Well, so basically, again, collaborating with them, engaging them in a way that you're helping them come to a solution, as opposed to saying this is what you must do. From a parent's perspective, might be helpful, unless, of course, you do feel they're at risk to themselves or others, and then 911.
Yeah, you have. I often talk with when I'm providing clinical supervision to other professionals about taking a deep breath and trusting that you've got more time than you think. And so you've got the time to help shift that from an adversarial situation to let's do this together. And how can we work together on this? And they may never go for help, but the fact that that the consistent message that they're getting from you as a parent is that you're willing to be helpful. Okay. Sometimes we have to hold on and hope that that's enough. Okay,
thanks. Another question is, what about safety plans? Do they work? Do you use them? Should parents try and put one in place?
Sure. So there's I had this conversation just the other day with a colleague. Sometimes we get confused between contracting for safety and safety plans. So contracting for safety, which is basically saying, literally sign this paper saying that you'll be okay and you will come to your appointment next week, or you'll be here in a month. The research into that has shown there's really no validity to that. There's little to no value in it. Safety planning is different, though, because the focus isn't on just tell me that you're going to still be alive. It's on, let's talk about things that we can do to help you be safe. So let's develop and be proactive and say, okay, so you are feeling suicidal or you are struggling right now. What are some of the things that you could do for yourself, or that we as your parents or other people supporting you could do to help you deal with that when you're feeling that way? That's a great conversation to have with our kids anyways. You can get some of the stereotypical ones. Maybe it's a nice warm bath to calm you down. Maybe it's a walk. Again, people with pets, it's often the unconditional love that you can get from, it seems, dogs in particular, but any type of pet. Let's come up with a list of things that you can do to help keep yourself safe. Is a much better conversation to have than just tell me that you're going to be here in a week. Right? So safety planning is something that professionals certainly do, and parents can work on with their youth as well, for sure.
Okay. Well, I know that in our list of resources after this presentation, there will be links to safety plans and sample safety plans, so parents can have a look at that. And a good piece of a safety plan is focusing on the reasons that a child does want to live, and so looking at the child's strengths. So that's definitely something to look at. What about social media? What about Facebook? Should parents be looking at their child's Facebook? Should they be more vigilant after an attempt? How do you face that topic?
That's probably a whole other topic all by itself. For me, the key in all this is the relationship that you've got with your child. It's absolutely natural as a parent, and it probably makes sense. It does make sense to be a bit more vigilant, a bit more involved in our kids' lives if we know that they're suicidal or if they've had a previous attempt. We don't want to get to the point where it becomes an issue that causes more harm than good, where they feel like they're hovering or being smothered or that kind of thing. So if I'm honest, the Facebook and social media, whether or not you have access to your kids or if you're one of their friends on Facebook, I really think that's an individual call, a parenting call sort of outside of this. But if you've got and you're developing or working on a strong relationship with your kid, it's the conversations that you have face to face that will help much more than being intimately aware of everything that they might post out there in the world. Because we also know that one of the things about Facebook and Twitter is there's an immediacy to those things where when someone has a bad day, they can put that out there, right? I think about, it wasn't on Facebook, but one of the calls that I went out on early in my career where a school counselor called me out to a school and said, you have to come out here because Johnny said he wants to kill himself. And so I jumped into my car and went to the school and met with Johnny. And Johnny had been in a game of tag all recess. And he was really tired and really sad because he couldn't tag anybody. So he said, oh my gosh, I wish I was dead. So if I equate that to a posting on Facebook or Twitter where someone goes, oh, I've had an awful day, I wish my life was over. There's an immediacy there that it's an expression of how they're feeling, but it isn't necessarily, I'm intending to kill myself. So then that fits in with other things that we talked about in terms of we want to be aware of and be able to have that conversation with our kids, that they're posting things like that and what does that mean for them. Because that's concerning that they would express themselves that way. But we also have to understand that the kids are, in that moment, we often say things that we don't really mean.
Right, and I suppose you have to look at it in the context of, are there other warning signs that go along with that post, and looking at how serious that post is based on what else is going on in the child's life. Okay, well that answers some of the question. And this question is a bit different because a lot of parents, especially with the recent suicides and that, are parents, if this may seem a bit odd, but if children are saying it a lot, obviously we can't ignore signs of suicide and risks and statements from children, but what if children or youth are saying all the time, I want to kill myself? There's that term compassion fatigue. How do parents avoid that in terms of, oh, there they go again, saying that again, if they're using that as a coping mechanism? That's a bit on the other end of the extreme. What would you say to parents if children are using that a lot?
Sure. Well, that's where you want to get help, right? In a slightly different context, we talked about not wanting to be the one person carrying that burden. If that's where the conversation seems to always be going, then it is probably, it's definitely good for you to be sharing your experience as a parent with someone, whether that's other parents or friends or professionals in the community. And it may be worth seeing if you can get your child connected to some sort of support out of concern around that. You also may or may not be, I mean, every kid is different, every family is different. You may be able to have a conversation around why are we always having that conversation? What else, depending on the age and how well that relationship is working in the moment, what else could you say or do to let me know that you're not happy about something? Because it really worries me when you're constantly telling me that.
Okay, thanks. I think just briefly to sum up and to end on a positive note, the proactive things that parents can do in terms of helping their children cope with situations so that they don't get to the state of being actively suicidal, would you say what would be the number one thing to be proactive?
Sure. Well, the interesting thing about that list that we went through in terms of what you can do to be helpful, those are things that are good for us to do at any point. We don't need to wait for our children to be suicidal to listen to them. Really what we're aiming for is a good, we don't have to be our kids' best friends. It's not about that. But a relationship that can allow those conversations to happen. So as a parent, you need to be interested and engaged enough in your kid's life to know that it looks like you might have had a bad day and have that conversation then, or just how was your day? And have conversation be a regular part of your family life so that when the bumps in the road, whether that's something significant like suicide or just a bad day,
come, your kids know that when you ask, you're interested, you actually want to know, and they feel comfortable coming home and sharing that. So that communication is really the single biggest protective factor if I had to pick one.
Well, certainly communication, active listening, and parents just really being there for their kids on many different levels, I think.
Which is not easy to do.
Sum it up, it's not easy to do. Absolutely not. As a mother of 4, I know only too well that it's tricky. However, we can all seek to improve and learn new skills. So thank you very much for joining us. And all of these sessions are pre-recorded, and they are archived on the Force website. So please feel free to check out any previous topics that may be of interest and supplement tonight's topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you.